Their equipment is getting older and more obsolete. And meanwhile, he lives in his bunkers and palaces, and he's further away from his people than ever before. I mean, there does come a point when you get to an October Revolution that happened in 1917, if he's not careful. I mean, he has more people repressing his population in uniform with weapons than he has at the front.
So what does it mean for NATO? Peter Caddick-Adams is an academic, defence journalist and historian of NATO. Good evening to you, Peter.
Hello, good evening.
Thank you for joining us on Times Radio. Let's look at the situation as it is on the ground for Ukraine. Lots of talk tonight about security guarantees. We're very unclear about exactly what provision that would involve, whether that would be even considered as part of a deal by Putin. But from what you study and understand, there's no sense that it's going to be a NATO force that would be in position in Ukraine.
Well, no, I mean, America is part of NATO, and there's an enormous reluctance from America to get involved in anything at all. So this is, as it was first labelled by, the Prime Minister, a coalition of the willing. I think that's much further down the line, and we've just got to see what kind of beast we're dealing with. I mean, at the moment, Ukraine is still under fire. There's been an air raid tonight with 4 missiles and 140 drones and several deaths. And that's the really important context to remember. While these talks are going on in Washington, D.C., Putin is throwing all he's got at Ukraine.
And what he's got is a seemingly inexhaustible number of troops to call upon, certainly more than Ukraine ultimately will be able to. And this long game, in this sense that although there's a degree of stalemate, or has been since the conflict begun, the momentum is with Putin on the battlefield, and the pressure for Zelensky to come to some sort of deal to end the violence must be there because the pressure just continues to build from Russia, and Putin knows this.
I disagree with that.
Well,
the Russians are really hurting. I mean, that's
true, but Putin doesn't care that they're hurt. He really doesn't care that many Russian soldiers are dying if it means he can keep providing new ones to replace them with.
Yeah, and their quality is going down. And although there's a seemingly endless horde, their equipment is getting older and more obsolete. And meanwhile, he lives in his bunkers and palaces, and he's further away from his people than ever before. I mean, there does come a point when you get to an October Revolution that happened in 1917, if he's not careful. I mean, he has more people repressing his population in uniform with weapons than he has at the front. That multiple has increased since they've gone to war. So this isn't throwing the entire Russian military machine at Ukraine. It's throwing a fair proportion and an increasing proportion of it at your own population. I mean, that's the bizarre thing. You've got to say, why is Putin even engaging with Trump or anyone else in these talks? And it's because Russia's hurting. Russia's hurting financially because it's not part of the banking system anymore, and the chief Russian sort of key figures aren't allowed to travel. That was one of the reasons why the meeting was held in Ankara, in Anchorage. In Alaska, because the Russians aren't part of the International Criminal Court. There aren't any other places the Russians can go to. So they are really feeling the pressure.
Yeah, but I guess the pressure there has been alleviated somewhat by turning up to Alaska, because up until that point, there was a moment where Trump was threatening to put in far greater sanctions, secondary sanctions on Russia.
Yeah.
And since turning up and walking along the red carpet to meet Trump, all talk of sanctions have gone completely. There's been no mention of those today, threatening Putin with more of those. Do you think that is a mistake by the US not to keep that increase that pressure and have some leverage over Putin?
Well, of course, he can always reintroduce them. I mean, the trouble about Trump is he's inconsistent. And the only consistent thing we can say about Trump is he's inconsistent, he's unpredictable. So he could easily return to doing that if he just simply gets out of bed the wrong side the following, one morning and decides he's annoyed with Putin all over again. And then that gives him a whole raft of sanctions to use as leverage again. We don't know whether that'll happen or not. I mean, it's just a really, really bizarre sort of situation, which is, of course, why the European leaders rushed over to Washington, D.C. to provide a bit of moral stability and support for President Zelensky, but also to provide a sort of moral compass in all of this, which is just sort of completely lacking in the administration on Capitol Hill.
They're also, according to reports of the FT, providing economic support in the form of $100 billion worth of purchasing of US weapons. Are Europe going to seriously now realise that they are going to have to continually to step up the financial backing of Ukraine when it comes to arming itself, if indeed this securities guarantee is likely to come with euros being spent by European countries and not America?
Yeah, and I think that was the point of those European leaders who went were advertising that actually, yes, very much that is something that they've realised they've got to do. And there will be plenty of others, the Baltics, the Poles, and so on. I mean, the Greeks, the Spanish, the Portuguese, much less so. Probably the Belgians the same. I mean, and this is perhaps reflecting also the sort of different administrations in power. But generally, Europe has, or the European members who are part of NATO, have realised they've got to spend more on defence, as indeed have we. It's got to go up to 5%. That's not going to come down anytime soon. It's a rude awakening to the third decade of the 21st century that these are troubled times. Those troubled times aren't going to suddenly go away. And we need to take defence more seriously than we have done since, well, probably 1945. And this has been a long time coming. I mean, the summit in Washington has been a long time coming. This should have happened 3 years ago. This is the summit we've been building up to for a long, long time. But we've, across Europe, there are probably the leaders in place who are in a position, who are really in a position to drive this, like the Germans and President Macron and our own Prime Minister.
Okay. Peter, thank you very much indeed. That's Peter Caddick-Adams, a historian of NATO. Donald Trump says he's already begun making arrangements for a meeting between Presidents Putin and Zelensky. How likely is that really to happen? With me now is Leslie Vinjamori, also a Professor of International Relations at SOAS University of London and Chief Executive of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Good evening to you, Leslie.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. So let's go to that question. Can you see a meeting happening between Presidents Trump, Putin, and Zelensky?
Certainly. Again, the real question is on what terms, with what conditions, to discuss what, and what happens between now and then. I think that President Trump clearly likes these summits, these meetings. There's a lot of press around them. There's certainly some risk attached, but now we've moved, after we got through Alaska, we moved into a space where that is the expectation. There is a momentum in terms of the diplomacy, but the really tough issues, does a ceasefire come first? What does security assurances really mean? What land swaps are being considered? And will President Trump back Zelensky's ambitions and desires on that front, or Vladimir Putin's? All of those things are obviously in play and very uncertain.
Do you expect them, though, needing to be put in place and agreed before that meeting can happen? Or can you see a situation where they meet with many of these big, really fundamental questions unresolved?
I think we are in a space now where a meeting could easily take place without things resolved. These are really hard things to resolve, first. Secondly, Donald Trump has made it clear that he doesn't think it's necessary to have a ceasefire in order to get a peace agreement. He's ignoring, of course, the fact that Russia continues to launch attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Vladimir Putin has no interest in having a ceasefire. So either Zelensky says no, which is a very risky thing to do for the president of Ukraine, given that he really needs to keep President Trump on his side and moving forward. For better, for worse, yes, I think it is possible that talks proceed without anything agreed before those talks take place.
Can a peace agreement be established that essentially freezes the conflict as it exists now? The issue of land exchange is not formally recognised. It's held, if you like, the battle lines are drawn and stay where they remain. And those bigger, really thorny questions about ownership of that and who's really in charge, that can come later. Is there a way of having a frozen conflict as opposed to a fully resolved conflict?
I mean, look, these are a series of really awful and tough choices. It is not clear right now how you freeze the conflict.
Well, just by stopping bombing the country illegally in Russia's case.
Yeah, except that Russia doesn't have any interest in freezing the conflict right now. So in theory, it's a very nice idea. In practice, I don't see how you get there unless the United States decides to really use its leverage to force that. Again, that's a really tall order when you've got a Russian leader that has no interest in stopping unless he gets what he wants. And right now, it doesn't look like he's going to get what he wants.
And in Zelensky and Ukraine's case, can they ever be in a position where they're able to countenance allowing certain amounts of land to move to Russia when that's just even constitutionally not allowed? Can you see a scenario at all where a bit of land is kept with Russia and lost from Ukraine?
Maybe. But first of all, de facto, as opposed to legal recognition. Secondly, if you are the leader of Ukraine, you don't give that away unless you have absolute confidence about what you're getting in return. What do those security assurances really look like, so that this doesn't just become the thin edge of the wedge of Russia taking more territory? What is America going to do to really shore up that credible deterrence threat against Russia were it to just use, that pause and that land to, rearm, rebuild, restore, and then move back in? Very few people who are deeply expert on Russia believe that, just giving some land away is going to deter Putin. If anything, they think it's going to do the opposite. So, from the point of view of Ukraine, it's not only risky for Zelensky personally, it's risky for the country. It's obviously risky from a precedent-setting point of view when it comes to international law, geopolitics. We tried to move past a position when you decided the boundaries, the territories of a country by the use of force. We were supposed to have gotten past that with the United Nations Charter. We're 80 years in, and here we are. So none of these are good options. But clearly, ongoing violent conflict and deep instability is also the worst of all worlds.
How much patience do you expect Donald Trump to have with this? As you say, he likes the show. He likes people turning up there and the cameras of the world being on him. And today is a show. It is for him to be in the spotlight. But can you see him entertaining this as a series, as a sort of repeated effort to get people around the table with nothing being resolved? I mean, there comes a point where he's going to have to say, I'm done with you all because I can't do what I promised to be able to deliver really fast. Does he have the patience for the long haul of this?
That is a very difficult question to answer. If you think of some of the most difficult, protracted conflicts around the world and peace negotiations and talks that have gone on to try to resolve those, some of these processes go on for months, if not years. Whether President Trump would personally stay engaged, it's difficult to imagine that. He might come in at different points, but this is a dangerous and urgent situation that unfortunately many people think will drag on for a very long time. But will Donald Trump simply walk away from it? I actually think that that's quite difficult to imagine right now. I think he wants this. He wants to see the situation change, ideally resolve, but at least change. He wants to be able to claim some success, but I actually think he genuinely wants to be successful as well as to claim it. So he is going to get frustrated, but washing his hands of it seems very unlikely right now.